Okay, then welcome to the Village of Pemberton Council meeting day. Today, the first order of business prior to starting the regular council meeting will be to hold the 2021 budget information session. The manager of finance will be presenting the 2021 budget, and an opportunity for questions from the public will follow. I'll now call upon Ms. Lena Martin, our manager of finance, to present the 2021 budget. Just wait for Ms. Martin to join. Is she in the waiting room? Or?
No, she's here.
There we go. There we go. Sorry about that.
Then
Good
Ms.
morning.
Good morning,
As
Ms.
you can see, mornings don't do well, so I'll be a little slower for everybody today. Good morning to Mayor and Council. This is the Village of Pemberton 2021 draft budget information session. I'm just going to go through our slideshow that we've prepared and go over a couple of notes and then go into question period.
Okay, I'm just going to do something there if everyone's good with that. Okay.
Okay, so we'll just take, I've summarized, oh, thanks, Nikki.
Yeah.
Thank you, yes. I don't have the technology at home to do this, so Nikki's gonna tab forward for me. So Nikki, maybe I'll just say slide and you can go forward one.
Yep.
Okay, so slide. Thank you. So starting, right there you go.
Okay, yeah.
So we're starting with some highlights from the 3 meetings that we've had to date. We've had 3 budget sessions and 1 tax implication. Sorry, we're having the 3rd meeting tonight, and we had the tax implication at the last budget meeting. So these are just some highlights that have been pulled off of those reports. From the first review of the completed assessment roll, we see an assessment increase overall, an average of 9.97% over 2020. This is due to market value, so sales of homes of 4.76% and 5.21% of non-market change, new construction or inventory. This is a small upward change from 2020. Assessments for residential homes again increased in value. Their average is 11.32%, with other classes decreasing in value, such as industry, commercial, nonprofit, and farm. Our other government requisitions have not yet been received, such as the Squamish-Lillooet District, or Regional District, Municipal Finance Authority, etc. Staff and council salaries are shown with 0.8% increase in CPI, which is the CPI set by Statistics Canada. There's going to be a 2021 operational reserve or recommended operational reserve of $2,960, and so far a capital reserve of $86,498. User fees for water reserves are shown with a 0 increase again in 2021, and user fees for sewer are shown again with a $40,000 overall increase in 2021. The current operating budget is up 1.8% from 2020, and the Council Committee of the Whole have also recommended an additional draft increase of 2.2% for capital reserves. A shift of new development and market sales for 2021 shows an above average assessment values for larger residential homes. These are ones that value in the $900,000 to $1 million range, and that results in higher taxes by assessment shift for those homes. There's lower assessment change and taxes for smaller residential homes like townhomes and condos and downtown businesses. So those that are lower than average will see a lower tax rate. There are also 27 pay periods this year in our calendar year, which is reflected in the salaries showing higher than average, and it's due to last year's leap year. Slide. So this report is the non-market change report that we received from BC Assessment. So as you can see, The average on the bottom for all classes, 9.97%. And if you look at 0-1 residential total, you can see that's 11.32%. So that is showing that the residential homes are growing in value at a quicker rate than the average in Pemberton. Slide. So we also had a COVID-19 Safe Restart grant. The Village of Pemberton and its government partners are continuing to monitor and assess the impact of COVID-19 in our community. The province provided enhanced relief for municipalities, issuing a COVID-19 Safe Restart grant for local governments of $987,000. The grant assists with COVID-19 related shortfalls for revenue loss, facility opening and reopening, emergency planning and response bylaw, protective services, computer and technology, and other related costs. The following allocations of COVID-19 Safe Restart grant and operations for 2020 and 2021 are estimated and include the following projects in 2020 and 2021, with a remaining value so far of $710,099. Additional recoveries will be identified over the calendar year while monitoring the effect of the budget as the COVID-19 pandemic continues. Additional grant revenue may be allocated to recreation following the Pemberton Valley and Utility Services Committee budget meeting. Staff are reviewing other potential COVID-19 grant eligible projects such as boardwalk replacement or a bylaw truck. Slide. So we'll start with administration and financial services. This is the team of the Office of the CAO, which includes the CAO, Executive Assistant and Human Resources, Communities and Grant Coordinator, Emergency Management, Corporate and Legislative Services, which is the manager, the Corporate and Legislative Services Assistant, Bylaw Officer, and Administration Assistant. Finance and IT is the Manager of Finance, the Senior Accountant Supervisor, the Accountant, and the Finance Data Clerk. Slide. This is pretty small, so we will upload this to the website, and it's also included on our agenda for the Committee of the Whole meeting this afternoon. You can find the full detailed budget package there. Slide. If we just do a top level look at administrative capital and projects, these are some of the items that are working on under this department this year. The software for our financial services will be upgraded, and it is supplied by the grant. There'll be workstation improvements and laptop improvements for continued remote working. The bylaw truck that has been added will be, currently we're looking at debt financing for the bylaw truck, though we are looking at opportunities for potentially putting that under our grant. There is a virtual legislative software also covered under our grant, a community wildfire protection plan covered under a grant, and cultural training and emergency operations for personnel, and that's also covered under a grant. Slide. If we look at this graph, shows us some really interesting information. So these are expenses for budgets from 2017 through 2021. As you can see, there's a line here for total expenses, taxes allocated, and other grants and revenue. Other revenue can be debt, it can be reserves, or it could be others, such as permits. If you look at 2016, they're all fairly simple, staying in line with one another with small amounts of growth, 2016 and 2017. And then you see as we go to 2018 and 2019, we start to see some spread between the budget, that is the expenses it takes to run the government, and the allocation of taxes to run the government. And if you look at the other side of that, you can see that grants and other revenue increased. That could mean that what we've done is we've replaced covering the expenses with reserves and debt financing instead of taxation. Then if we follow along the graph, you can see 2020, there's a sharp decrease in all values, and that was due to the COVID-19 pandemic, where council reviewed and trimmed the budget to essential service in 2020. There was also a 0% tax increase, and spending was limited. Now the rebound of that in 2021, you can see that the expenses are back in line with the growth that was happening for Pemberton. However, taxes are still low. In fact, there's a higher disparity between taxes and the growth of the municipality, and there's a sharp rise in other revenue. So there's a sharp rise in the use of reserves and debt financing to continue. Obviously, this trend we'll talk about a little bit later, but this is a trend that's not, we can't maintain. It's not sustainable. It's something that we discussed for this year, along with last year, to aid in the growth of the town versus the pandemic. Slide. So team members for governance is the mayor and 4 councillors. Slide. And this is the expenses for the legislation. There's a slight increase in indemnities, and that's just due to the 27 pay periods. The council members are on a bylaw, so they only saw a 0.8% increase in their indemnity. Slide. The fire department is made up of a fire chief, a deputy chief, 3 officers, and volunteer firefighters. I have 24. That value changes all the time. The chief has quarterly reports that'll bring you up to date with that. The fire service is funded by the Village of Pemberton through a fire service agreement with the Squamish-Lillooet Regional District and Lillooet to service the areas of the Pemberton Fire District, the Pemberton Meadows, Mount Currie, and the Heights. Slide. Again, we see the expenses for 2020, 2021. Slide. These are some of the top projects that the fire department is working on this year. They have a rotation of SCBA tanks that are being replaced, so that stays on their project list. We've added a mini repeater to get a signal further down the Inchuk FSR. Updated gas detectors in the fire hall, truck radio upgrades, commercial bunker gear, a washer dryer for the fire hall, and that will be covered under the grant. And then new security fencing for the training grounds. Slide. Now, if we look at the fire department grant, you can see lines for our total expenses, which is the top, and our village taxes, which is the red line, the Squamish-Lillooet Regional District, and Lillooet contributions. And then we also see grants and other revenue as a blue line. What's interesting to note is the grants and other revenue mostly match the expenses that are occurring. The high yield in 2016, that was when there was debt financing for a new fire truck. So there was a sharp increase there. And then it goes back down to kind of regular operating. And you can see overall, if you look at the taxes and the contributions, that they generally stay in line with what is happening with the expenses, except for a change in 2018, where there was a reserve allocation instead of taxation, again, dipping into the reserves instead of taxing for increase in expenditures. And then you can see for 2020, we kind of flatlined there. And 2021, we also see not a lot of growth. However, you can see a sharper increase in the grants and other revenue. So that is also showing a higher reliance on reserves and other revenue instead of taxation. Slide. The Building and Development Department is a manager of development, a planner, a building inspector, and a building and planning clerk. Slide. And then we show the development services detail, which you can see in the agenda. Some top level projects for development services this year. There's a 2-year project starting in 2021 of an OCP review. That will be a 2-year contractor for 2021 and 2022, working on the DCC bylaw and also adding an online cloud permitting software, which will be covered under the grant. Slide. Now, if we look at developments detail graph, this is also an interesting graph. We see similar growth and similar taxation, though if you look in between 2018 and 2019, you see a shift, and that's where development really started to grow again for the village. And instead of the department relying on taxation to maintain, it is now now supplemented by development. So we have a lot more grants and other revenue. So that could be application fees, building permits, and also expense recovery. So that graph has switched over to kind of 50% recoverable and 50% taxation. Slide. Public Works and Parks is a nice big crew. It's a manager of operations, assistant manager of operations, a GIS that has moved from the planning department, water operator, a lead hand, equipment operator, a wastewater treatment plant operator, 2 laborers, and a summer student, and sometimes a winter student as well. Slide. And again, their detailed budget, which can be seen in the agenda. Slide. These are some of the projects that Public Works is looking to get through this year. It's quite a big list, so we may see some carry forward from 2021 into 2021. And of course, some of these are also from 2020. So we are continuing to do some recovery on Pebble Creek Road. That is covered under a grant, under a disaster recovery grant. There is, we're doing an application for another speed reader. The Public Works washroom is doing its completion, so the Public Works building and the Public Works roof also needs a small repair. There is an electronic emergency sign that we're looking into, and that would be covered under the grant. 1 Mile Lake trail widening under the grant. A Walnut drainage and culvert, which is a project shared with the PVDD. EV chargers, which is a regional grant, a shared project. Computer and Wi-Fi upgrades, again, funded by grants. The biggest one on here obviously is this new loader that's going to be done through debt financing. That is replacing financing that we have completed paying off this year. So there really doesn't have a big change in the budget for that new loader. It's just continuing on. And of course, our great soccer field and amenity building, which we just started very little work on at the end of 2020, and we're moving into our main work in 2021. There's 4.2 million left in that budget for that grant. And asset management plan, that's a carry forward from last year as well, funded by grants. We had funded it, funded from our gas tax revenue, though we are looking at other opportunities so we can save our gas tax revenue and looking for a UBCM grant. And that one unfortunately is in queue, so we might not be able to work on that one immediately, but we are still waiting to see. And then we also have an off-leash dog park that was added to our agenda at our last budget meeting, which will also be covered under the COVID grant. Slide. Public Works and Parks graph. This is, it shows a lot. It shows a very simple, straightforward line of taxation. So there's not a lot of growth here, very minimal, mostly due to consumer price index increases, especially for things like gas and supplies. And then where we have big jumps in budget, you can see big jumps in other revenue and grants. So that means that anytime we have a large project, we're covering it with other revenue rather than taxation. So we've had some large projects through 2018, 2019, 2020, and 2021, all covered by grants and other revenue. Slide. Transit. Funding from the service comes from equal partnership of the Village, the SLRD, and the Lil'wat Nation, with additional revenues from BC Transit and user fees, ticket sales. The service run is made up of a commuter to and from Whistler and a local to and from Mount Currie, and managed by BC Transit. The province has initiated a BC Restart Plan, which lays out a series of steps intended to protect people and help ensure that BC can recover from the effects of COVID-19 pandemic. The province, BC Transit, and Village of Pemberton, and our transit partners, the Squamish-Lillooet Regional District and Lil'wat Nation, recognize that transit is an essential service critical for providing public mobility during the acute phases of COVID-19 and for supporting social economic recovery of communities and the province as part of the BC Restart Plan. Under the federal Safe Restart Plan, the federal and provincial governments have committed to provide joint contributions in support of transit services. BC Transit has entered into a contribution agreement to receive $86 million to provide relief to local governments to help meet their share of costs to maintain affordable, essential transit service levels during this pandemic recovery. The Safe Restart contribution of $86 million was based on forecasted fare revenue losses and COVID-19 related expenses between April of 2020 and March 31st of 2022. That's a 2-year grant. Local government partners have been allocated a share of this Restart grant based on the share of total budgeted fare revenues or fare losses and share of operating expenses. Under the contribution agreement, $212,891 has been allocated to Pemberton for the paratransit system. Slide. And this is just the operating detail. As you can see, we just see general increases over time. This budget is given to us from BC Transit, and it is distributed amongst the partners. Slide. Transit services, you can see our BOP taxes allocated has maintained fairly steady. And 2020 to 2021, we have not done an increase. We have kept the value the same, even with the increases to the cost of running the service by BC Transit. This will be covered under the grants, the recovery grant. Slide. The management of recreation services for the community center, youth center, Meadow Parks, soccer fields, Gates Lake moved to the village from the SLRD in June of 2019. Budgets and tax requisitions continue to be reviewed by the PBIS committee, and the tax requisition is funded by the Squamish-Lillooet district as a cost share between the village of Pemberton and electoral area C. Slide. Water, we see our water fund services noted here. Again, the detail will be in the full agenda of the committee of the whole. Slide. These are some of the projects that Water Services is working on this year. Water treatment and investigation, we're doing a preliminary design. Ridge Reservoir cleaning. We continue to work on a water rate study, which is a carry forward from 2020. Chlorine analyzer for Eagle Drive, flow meter replacement. Again, continuing project for SCADA upgrades across our water and sewer systems. Our well number 3 had a pump head and motor replacement early this year. We are continuing to work on a genset for the wheelhouse, which is a project that started at the end of 2020. And a water truck is still projected for 2021. That was carried forward from 2020. Slide. We look at the detail for sewer, and we can slide forward to the sewer projects. So capital projects for sewer, we're seeing a lot more projects for sewer. We haven't done as much maintenance. We haven't had as much reserves for sewer. We did slowly start to add reserves for sewer to be able to do some of these projects, and they are starting to catch up with us now, which we will see more of with our asset management plan. So starting with sewer, we're looking at a confined space entry program. We're continuing with SCADA improvements to along with water. There's a river hydrology survey, outfall inline flushing, basin maintenance, variable frequency drive replacements, environmental monitoring. This is going to be on our list for a while. So it starts with a big hit, and then we'll have some maintenance annual monitoring following this up. Looking at industrial park generator with debt financing, and sewer rate analysis to go along with our water rate analysis to ensure we're maintaining the right rate levels for our capital improvements and future improvements. Slide. And then we have the airport annual detail budget. Slide. Tax implications. So at our council meeting, our third council meeting, or sorry, our committee of the whole meeting, we looked at what an average home would pay for specific tax increases. You can see some columns here. There's houses and townhomes and different, both different sizes and also different classes. So you'll have residential, light industry, commercial, nonprofit, and farms. And then we have a small aerial graphic where they are. The assessment shift is a shift that happened due to your BC assessment value for your home. And as you can see at the top, if we just look at the houses, those top ones will probably, that see an assessment increase will be increased due to a higher than average change in their assessment. And then those townhomes and houses that are smaller and condos that will see a decrease in their taxes because their homes did not increase as fast as the average. And then we also looked at what does a 1%, 2%, 4%, 6%, and 8% tax increase look like to those average homes. If we look at the recommended, which was 4%, you can see that those higher than average homes, the ones that are about $1 million, will see a tax change of $100 annually. And those ones that are smaller, townhomes and condos, will see a change of about $18 annually for a 4% tax increase. Slide. Financial planning was a big thing that was discussed at our budget sessions. So budget session 2, discussion focused on the effect and continued low tax increases that do not match operational cost increases, as we could see from our graphs, leading to a depletion of our reserves and necessitating larger future tax increases in subsequent annual budgets. In 2020, at the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic, staff presented a long-term financial information report with a view on operating costs, asset management increases, financing debt, future capital expenditures, and capital reserves. For many years, municipalities have been faced with major management challenges. With ever-increasing operating costs, they're called upon to provide more services like transportation, road networks, leisure services, recreation, water, sewer, while revenue struggles to keep up. As a result, municipalities are often faced with shrinking flexibility due to the imbalance between the financial needs of the municipality and our inability to pay. While contributions have helped to rebalance the budget to a certain extent through the implementation of a municipal infrastructure program, municipalities continue to face major challenges as several grants require payment of at least a third of project funding. So we've been very happy to receive those grants, but 25% of $5 million does have to come out of somewhere. The goal is to provide sufficient services while taking into account taxpayers' ability to pay, while implementing the best financial strategies and financing the most advantageous projects while maintaining a reasonable debt level. Slide. The intent of our financial plan, which we're going to be reviewing on our committee of the whole meeting this afternoon, is to demonstrate the need for and the impact of the above. While the long-term financial plan does not address service levels, a service level would be how many potholes do you need before you pave the road? Do you want 1 pothole or do you want 5 potholes? It's important to recognize that services and service levels ultimately drive cost. As the village expands services, enhances service levels, or expands through development, its cost will increase accordingly. Similarly, the ability of the village to keep taxes low will need to be accompanied by a corresponding decrease in service or service level. It should be noted that for every new tax dollar created by new development, the municipality needs to reinvest in maintaining the new or updated services, roads, sidewalks, water, sewer stations, for example, and amenities, parks and trails for new development when we create new parks and trails, which will result in the need for increased taxation. In 2021, the village has seen a shift in revenues as previous year's projects complete and tax increases remain low. As such, tax revenues and user fees for services are utilized in the operating budget rather than increasing our capital reserves for future capital improvements and replacement. Slide. So this is just looking at our capture of last year. When a tax notice is sent out by the municipality, it includes the municipal taxes and also taxes collected for other governments. So other governments send us a requisition and we collect it and send them the money. If we look at last year's pie chart, you can see of all the tax collected on the tax notices, only 30% of that pie chart was for municipality. The remainder, largest remainder is other governments of 56%. Slide. So right now we're in public consultation, and then we'll be looking at our 5-year financial plan review, and then moving forward towards adoption. We'll look forward to our tax rate bylaws to be reviewed and adopted, and our frontage water sewer taxes to be adopted at the end of May. That's it.
Thank you, Martin. That was great. I will. I would like to open the budget information session to the public now for comment. So if you do want to ask a question or make a comment, please click on the raise hand feature in the webinar controls. This will notify our staff that you'd like to ask a question. Staff will announce your name when it's your turn, and you will be prompted to unmute your microphone. Please be reminded that only comments directly related to the 2021 budget are permitted. So I will look to Ms. Kennedy to check our attendee list. Let me know if we have questions.
Yes, Mayor Richmond, Nikki Van Kirk has her hand raised.
Go ahead, Ms. Van Kirk.
Hi there. Thanks for taking my question.
Morning.
I wondered about the grants that we've got for the restart from COVID, and if there's some kind of a deadline within which we have to use it. It feels like we haven't really aggressively used the 900,000 or whatever it was that we had.
I don't think we have a deadline. Sorry, I'm choking on my own copy. I believe that both that and the transit are looking at a 2-year expenditure. So we don't know what this year is going to look like, or even next year is going to look like. We have received the funds, and all we have to remit to the government is how we have spent them.
I make a note on that. I think one of the other, I guess, complex issues with regard to that funding is they can only be used on certain projects, which we're quite limited on. So by law, sort of a loss of revenue, any IT infrastructure that we require, those are sort of the projects that they've identified that we can use. So we're looking to the best of our ability to see where we can add projects that would fulfill that mandate. And as we go through the years, we're also going to identify and see some of those additional expenses that we might not have known that we can then reallocate or allocate some of those restart funds to.
So is the plan to sort of carefully meet it out, or do you have a schedule, or you're just looking for, as you find projects, you just be applying it?
We're looking, just to be clear, council and staff have been looking really carefully at every department to see what expenses that were going to be made and what other expenses that we could look at to go under the grant. That's been a big part of the conversation throughout the whole budget discussion. So I think I hear where you're coming from, Ms. Van Kirk. We're very keen to make sure that we don't leave any funds on the table. We want to use them in any way we can to benefit the village. As Ms. Gilmore said, it is limited to some stuff, but we're poking as hard as we can, and it's on a staff-to-staff level, and I've coordinated with other mayors to see where they're using funds in other municipalities. There does seem to be a bit of a variation, but it looks like we have 2 years, and yeah, we're gonna, if some things that we're looking at can be, you know, for instance, the widening of 1 Mile Lake Trail, there's one that we wanted to do. Anyways, that falls under the restart fund, so we will definitely do that. We're looking to see if we can get the boardwalk in there, the dog fence, you know, those are projects we've been wanting to do, and we're hoping that we'll be able to get all of that under the restart funds.
Okay, and I have another question on a different topic, if I may. At the end, the discussion around the service levels and cost when new builds or new houses are added, that there is quite a significant cost. I wondered if there's some kind of a formula or understanding as new development is approved, the difference between the cost that eventually the taxpayers have to maintain the roads and sewers and all of that versus the income we would maybe get from development cost charges, or I guess taxation as it goes forward.
There's a couple of different things that affect new development. So as new development comes online, based on the development bylaws, we collect community amenity funds, we collect DCCs, we collect application and other fees and licenses. So the upstart of that is generally covered. And then that new market also comes online. So you'll see that non-market change that happened when we showed the assessment shift. So non-market change actually offsets the taxes a little bit. I think this year we saw $75,000 in taxation come from non-market change that offset the budget this year, which is taxes that wouldn't increase for the remaining folios. And then moving forward, what we look at is any capital improvements that are brought into our assets. So something like a transfer station, a sewer transfer station. The pro to that is that we didn't have to pay to build that station. So that can be in the millions of dollars that we're looking at bringing on those capital assets that taxpayers don't pay. And then it's the maintenance of those infrastructures that those are transferred to the municipality. So while we don't pay upfront, then we do pay to maintain and replace that asset down the road. So there's kind of a 50-50. It's a win. I think it's a win-win. We don't have to pay for that infrastructure coming into our system. Now, that said, if a developer puts in a road and then transfers the road to the village, at some point that road has to be snow cleared. At some point that road has to be paved. At some point that road has to be replaced. So while we are covered for those assets and amenities that come from development, we have to still look to the future on maintaining our infrastructure as a whole. Nikki, did you want to add anything to that?
No, that's great. I think it's just important for council and for everyone to understand that, you know, as we bring on, if we bring on new development, new roads, et cetera, that it is on us to maintain it. And it might mean, like you mentioned, a reduction in service level somewhere else to cover it if we don't have taxes. It seems like tax revenue is such a small part of what covers our budget. So I just wanted to make sure that everyone's clear on that. Thank you.
Thank you. Any?
There are no further hands raised at this time.
Give it a minute here just in case. Are there any other questions for Ms. Martin or anybody with regards to the budget presentation? No? Clear?
Nothing.
Okay. Well, thanks for that, Ms. Martin, and thanks everybody. We're going to proceed with our regular meeting now. Do you guys have to do anything? And thanks, Ms. Martin. We'll see you this afternoon, I guess.
I think you'll see me twice this afternoon. So we have parcel tax meeting and a committee of the whole. So I'll see you then.
Awesome. Are there any tech adjustments here for the meeting, or can I just open up and go?
You may go ahead, Mr. Mayor.
So I'd like to call to order regular council meeting number 1534 for March 16th. And in honor of the Tsleil-Waututh, the Village of Pemberton acknowledges that we are meeting within the unceded territory of the Tsleil-Waututh Nation. This meeting of council is being held virtually with all meeting participants attending via electronic communications in order to adhere to the PHO orders respecting physical distancing. Council members will be involved in and participate in the meeting virtually as they would in person. For those members of the public in attendance, please note that this meeting is a live webinar and is being recorded. A recording of the meeting will be available on the village's website following the meeting. Council members attending the meeting are required to verbally advise the chair when they leave the meeting and return so that this can be recorded in the minutes of the meeting. For clarity, if a council member does not verbally advise the chair but is observed to be absent from their video feed for an extended period of time and their video feed remains on, and it is unclear to staff whether they're present, the council member will be marked absent from the meeting until such time as staff observes the council member to reappear in the video feed. Members of the public who wish to ask questions during open question period at the end of the meeting will be able to do so, and I will provide instructions at that time. Are there any amendments to the agenda? Seeing none, can I get a motion to approve the agenda as presented? Moved by Councillor Noble, second by Councillor Paddock. In favor, opposed? Motion carries. Adoption of minutes from regular council meeting 1533 from March 2nd. Moved by Councillor Kraddick, second by Councillor Noble. All in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Any business arising? Rise with report from in camera. We don't have business arising for committee of the whole minutes delegation. So we're going to go right into number 9, which is 9A, the office of the CAO for Ms. Gilmore's global report.
I don't have anything this morning.
Okay, corporate and legislative services. Ms. Fraser, we're talking about the Lower Mainland Local Government Association resolutions.
Good morning, Mayor and Council. Thank you for having me. Council will recall that we've been working on resolution submissions to the Lower Mainland Local Government Association meeting, which is being held in May, and resolutions that are ratified or endorsed at that meeting then move forward to the UBCM meeting in September. We have submitted one resolution related to consideration of changing the name of the province, the coat of arms, and the flags, and that was submitted after last meeting. Council also wanted to look at submitting a second resolution around tourism and specifically some of the challenges that we're having now that we've been everybody's being encouraged to visit at home, and some of the impacts that are happening within vulnerable and natural environment spaces, and the protection of First Nations lands. And council staff noted at the last meeting that we have in the past, the Village of Pemberton has in the past submitted a couple of resolutions related to funding, allocating funding and support to local governments around tourism and some of the impacts that we're having as a result of more activity. And came back to council asking for a little bit more in terms of the direction that council wanted to do, because under the sort of rules of these meetings, if you've submitted an application or a resolution on an item once, it can't come back a second time, particularly if the province has addressed the matter. So what council asked us to do is look at it through a COVID lens and see if there was a resolution that we could prepare around sort of in response to the impacts that the COVID-19 pandemic has had. Again, looking at the fact that we're being asked to stay at home and travel and explore in our own backyards. And so we did a little look at Destination BC's report, and taking that lens into effect and looking at the report that Destination BC has put out around the encouraging of traveling local, and prepared a resolution for council's consideration related to this, focusing on the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic, which has been presented for council's consideration. And that proposed resolution is, whereas in the summer of 2020, in response to the COVID-19 pandemic, the province moved to phase 3 of BC's Restart Plan, which resulted in Destination BC focusing on encouraging residents to explore BC as a way to promote domestic tourism. And whereas the Explore BC campaign has been so successful that unprecedented numbers of residents and visitors have sought ways to experience the province's natural environment, and these numbers are expected to continue beyond the active pandemic phase. Therefore, be resolved that the province provide funding to assist local governments in establishing sustainable tourism policies and programs to ensure that visitor use of lands and natural resources is done in a manner that protects the natural environment in perpetuity. And that is before council for consideration.
Thank you, Ms. Fraser. And thanks for putting that together for staff. I know we had to wanted to change it and put that COVID lens on it. I think that's great. Are there thoughts from council in terms of the wording here? Go ahead, Councilor.
Yeah, thanks very much, Mayor Richmond. I think it's been well thought out. I think it's appropriate this time through the COVID experience that we are, as the report says, seeing a lot more visitors in our area. And I think that will continue once the they see what kind of recreational activities we have in the valley here. So I'm glad to see us bringing it forward, and I would certainly support a motion to agree to it.
So before we put a motion on, my question, I guess my only question for council would be, in the be it resolved part, in the resolution, is our ask to provide funding to assist local governments specifically in this endeavor? Or is there more to it? Like, I'm just wondering how specific we want it to be on, we're, certainly having funds for local government to manage the onslaught of visitors that we're going to see is a big part of what we're talking about here. But I was just wondering if there was also more funding for their own, for the province's own departments, like managing the parks, managing the rec sites, the highways, the FSRs. That doesn't fall under local government. So I don't know if we're asking, you know what I mean? And I know it's late in the game. I just want to make sure we're asking for the right thing. Councilor Antonelli, go ahead.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I don't think it really falls to local government to address the impacts of tourism in all ways. And I think a lot of it falls to the province. So more funding could also be directed to provincial agencies.
So can we maybe look at just adding to that? So that, Councilor Noble, did you have your hand up there? Sorry. Okay. Add to that somehow the province provides. I think there should be an as well as there, funding to look, as well as increased funding to manage parks, rec sites, crown lands. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. So we could say increase funding to provincial agencies or provincial programs and departments. Or do you want to be specific in saying BC Parks?
I mean, for me, what I just listed is, it covers it all, but I would say it's the FSRs, it's the Crown Land, the parks, the rec sites, and funding for local government to help on that.
Okay.
Maybe funding towards the ministries responsible for
Ministries,
that?
yeah.
Increased funding for the management of those lands, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Would somebody like to move it with that amendment?
I'll move it.
Councilor Noble, seconded by Councilor Antonelli. Further discussion? Anyone opposed? Motion carries. We didn't need a motion on the other one, the other resolution, because we're good with that, right, Ms. Fraser?
Sorry, which?
The BC flag, that one's all covered.
No, that's all covered and it's been submitted already. But one thing that we did discuss, or council did discuss at the last meeting, was the attending the LMLGA conference. And I believe that Councillor Noble was going to attend, but we didn't get a resolution. And we didn't also know if anybody else wanted to attend. The registration fees are, I think it's $200 and then plus taxes. And just for council's knowledge, if you want to speak to your resolution that we're submitting, you must be an attendee, a registered attendee of the conference. So you can't just go for that session. You must have registered. So it is all being done virtually. And but the registration fees are $200, which has been accounted for in the legislative services budget. So, but we just need to know, and thought that it would be appropriate to have a resolution as to who council wishes to have attend the virtual annual meeting in May.
And just to add to that, the sessions are all virtual, obviously, and if you're an attendee or if you're registered, then you get to watch them at your leisure whenever they're recorded. So it's not like you have to be present for the 3 days or whatever it is. So with what Ms. Fraser just said, would anybody like to register and or speak to the resolutions? And I'll be bringing up a third resolution, as you know, in a minute. Go ahead, Councilor Noble.
I'm willing to attend.
Okay.
Good.
All right, so if we could just get a resolution that Councillor Noble attend the 2021 virtual LMLGA conference and AGM, and that staff be directed to arrange registration.
Moved by Councillor Antonelli, seconded by Councillor Craddock. All in favor? Opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you.
And then I wanted to, I sent it around, I'm sorry it was last minute, a resolution regarding childcare spaces. It came out of one of my conversations with Mary Elliott from Squamish, because they're facing similar challenges in qualifying for the childcare creation spaces in meeting the $40,000 per space eligibility criteria, just like us. And so in some of our conversations, we discussed the idea of co-sponsoring a resolution. We've sent it back and forth pretty quickly. I sent you, or a couple times, I sent you the wording on that. I can read it out for anybody's. So what we're looking at is, whereas the province of BC has committed to supporting universal childcare and launched the New Spaces Fund to create thousands of new childcare spaces across BC, and whereas many rural and remote communities in BC face higher than average construction costs, including additional hazard mitigation and flood construction requirements, also face a high unmet community demand for safe, affordable, licensed childcare facilities. Therefore, be it resolved that the Minister and Ministry of Children and Family Development acknowledge communities contending with defensible, higher than average construction costs and evidence unmet childcare needs by updating the New Spaces to allow for the submission of proposals that exceed the current $40,000 per space funding limit. So that's what we put together. We're not married to it. If any tweaks or that you see that you'd like to add, once we approve it, I'll send it back to Mayor Elliott, and if you sponsor a resolution, you have to make sure that it's exactly the same coming from us. So whatever she was happy with the changes. I sent the last round of changes. So whatever we come up with here today, hopefully will work for them and they'll pass a similar resolution. So are there any changes or improvements to that or thoughts? Nothing? You're comfortable passing this co-sponsored with District of Squamish? Councillor Craddock.
Just a question, Mayor Richmond. If the provincial government does not see fit to increase it beyond $40, is the wish of council to accept the $40 and fund the remaining amount then? Because I knew the new funding stream is supposed to be announced fairly shortly.
I think that's a conversation we'll definitely have to look at. I mean, we'll have to see what that shortfall is. As you know, our application is in, like you say, hopefully we'll find out soon, and that'll trigger that bigger conversation, I would say. Ms. Gomo.
I just wanted to mention that we would most likely, typically we would get approval or denial of the grant application or the funding application we submitted. So hypothetically, we'd probably need to wait for the next intake. And so we would have a little bit of time to figure out how we might fund a shortfall per se. I have been advised that they have been somewhat delayed in providing an announcement, but they are still working on it, and we should hear about it in I think the next month or so.
Any other thoughts? Somebody like to make a motion to co-sponsor that resolution?
I'll make the motion.
Seconder. Councillor Craddock, discussion. Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Fraser. We're on to 9C, Pemberton Fire Rescue Department. We'll wait for Fire Chief Grossman to join us.
Good morning, Mayor and Council.
Good morning, Chief Grossman. How are you?
I'm well. Hope everyone is doing well.
Whenever you're ready, we're we'll turn it over to you here about the Fire Smart Community Resilience Investment Grant funding.
Okay, so the purpose of this report is to seek council support in making application for grant funding up to $150,000 from UBCM under the Community Resilience Investment Program, CRI program, for the Village of Pemberton Fire Smart program. So the Community Resilience Investment Program is a provincial program intended to reduce the risk and impact of wildfire to communities in BC through community funding, support and priority fuel management activities, and funding requests for Fire Smart activities. The Fire Smart Community Funding and Supports Program is a grant available under the CRI program that provides funding to local governments and First Nations to increase community resilience by undertaking community-based Fire Smart planning and activities that reduce the community's risk from wildfire. The application is for 2021 funding to create 2 new positions of a Fire Smart program coordinator and worker to develop a more comprehensive community-based Fire Smart program that will focus on developments in the wildfire interface, education for homeowners, and home assessments to assist residents on decision-making to help them ready their home from a wildfire. Fuel management activities will continue primarily at the local homeowner level. The 2 positions' temporary 1-year terms will be created tentatively August 2021 upon receiving approval for the grant. And then the impact on budget, the grant funding can contribute 100% of the cost of eligible activities to a maximum of $150,000. Eligible expenditures include consultant costs, applicant staff and administration costs, and public information costs, as well as funding allows for the development and promotion of local Fire Smart activities, as well as fuel management on publicly owned property, land. A completed submission must be submitted by March 19th, 2021. So the recommendation is the application for grant funding up to $150,000 from Union of BC Municipalities under the Community Resilience Investment Program, which provides 100% funding for the Village of Pemberton Fire Smart program be supported.
Thank you, Chief Grossman. Any questions? That's great.
Thanks, Mayor Richmond, and through to Chief Grossman. When we do these Fire Smart programs, are we connecting with any local groups and organizations like the Pemberton Wildlife Association that have put a lot of time and effort and money into setting up new feeding ranges for deer and that type of thing to make sure that we're working together to make sure we're not stepping on each other's toes?
And that's part of the plan. The Fire Smart works like, I'll use the Glen as an example, where we would go around, assess with the homeowners, and then what they can do to make their property more Fire Smart. But in turn, we're also working with different groups as they're going forward, making sure that those areas that they're working on are fire resistant. And we're also looking at working with Mount Currie's or Lillooet Nation's Fire Smart coordinator as well, if they're successful in the application as well too, especially for areas that are close boundaries, Pemberton boundary and Lillooet Nation boundary. So
thanks very much, Chief.
Any other questions? Somebody like to move the motion as presented to support the application? Councilor Noble, seconded by Councilor Antonelli. For the discussion, anyone opposed? Motion carries. Road Rescue Service is an outside the SLRD electoral C. Mr. Grossman.
thank you. So the purpose of this report is to seek a resolution from council to support Pemberton Fire Rescue response to areas outside the road rescue boundary of the Squamish-Lillooet Regional District Electoral Area C. So Pemberton Fire Rescue provides road rescue service to the entire SLRD Area C, covering 5,570 square kilometers Pursuant to SLRD Permanent Fire Rescue Contribution Service Conversion and Establishment Bylaw number 715201. So a map was attached showing the size of the Area C and giving you a quick boundary areas. So it reaches south to our rural municipality boundary of the resort of Whistler, north of Highway 99 to the first Cayush Creek Bridge, roughly 2 kilometers north of Joffrey Lakes parking area, just past Darcy on Pemberton Portage Road at the start of the Highline Forest Service Road, 16 kilometers up the Hurley Forest Service Road, 25 kilometers down the Inchuk Forest Service Road to the end of the Lillooet Forest Service Road by Keyhole Hot Springs, and then to the end of Pemberton Meadows Road, roughly 9749 Pemberton Meadows Road. So over the past while before I was here, there was been a mutual understanding that Pemberton Fire Rescue will respond as far north as Highway 99, Duffy Lake Road to Blowdown Creek, which is just past Duffy Lake, which is approximately 50-kilometer mark. And Lillooet Road Rescue will respond from Lillooet to Blowdown Creek, which is also approximately 50 kilometers. And this has been a mutual understanding that Pemberton Fire Rescue will respond to the areas outside of Area C and remote areas when there has been a known entrapment. We also travel outside of Area C for a motor vehicle accident, or when Pemberton Fire Rescue travels outside of Area C for a motor vehicle incident, we contact EMBC Emergency Management British Columbia, and a task number is requested to ensure cost recovery outside of our area is done. Each year, we've always put in the application and have been recognized as a road rescue service provider. This year, there's been changes to EMBC, and now they require that to be recognized as a road rescue service provider outside of its jurisdiction, permission from council must be granted to do so. The permission required is to continue to respond to the areas outside of the boundary of SLRD Area C not covered by existing agreements as follows. Highway 99, Duffy Lake Road to the boat launch on Duffy Lake and to Blowdown Creek. Lillooet covers beyond Blowdown as per the agreement. Pemberton Fire Rescue will also respond to areas listed below that are outside the Area C when known entrapment is confirmed. So the Hurley River Forest Service Road past the 16-kilometer boundary, Pemberton Portage Road past the SLRD Area C, which is by the High Line, and then the Inchuk Forest Service Road past the 25-kilometer boundary. So this will be all cost recovery. It's just a matter of EMBC requesting this resolution, and the recommendation is that council supports the continuation of Pemberton Fire Rescue to provide road rescue service to areas outside of the Area C that include the following, and just named them in there.
Ms. Fraser, you had something to add?
I just wanted clarification that the resolution also needs to include the Hurley River Forest Service Road, the Pemberton Portage Road, the Highline Road, and in Chukcha. Does that resolution need to include those 4?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
That's
So
good.
the recommendation that's on the agenda cover needs to be, and in the report needs to be adjusted to make sure that those 4 areas are also included.
I'll get you to read the resolution back just to be clear when you're ready to go.
Okay, the council supports, sorry, hang on, flipping here. The council supports the continuation of the Pemberton Fire Rescue to provide road rescue service to areas outside the SLRD electoral area C that include the following: Highway 99 North, Duffy Lake Road to the boat launch on Duffy Lake and to Blowdown Creek as per the agreement with Lillooet Road Rescue, as well to the Hurley River Forest Service Road past the 16-kilometer boundary, Pemberton Portage Road past the SLRD electoral area C boundary, Highline Road, and in Chukcha past the 25-kilometer boundary.
Thank you. That's got it. Go ahead.
Thanks very much. And again, through Chief Grossman, I have some concern that extending our boundaries beyond what we're looking at this time. And you talked about we could bill for cost recovery. I guess my concern is the cost recovery going to those further places and basically on off-road type of situations? Does it cover the extra wear and tear in the vehicles? And is it higher amount than what we would pay to work within our own boundaries?
The rate is set by EMBC, and I don't have those offhand. The big factor is that we looked at all of the Forest Service roads, and what we thought is because the main road, the Inchuk Forest Service Road, is a main road down to communities there back and forth. We've been getting cost recovery from that. As long as it's known entrapment, we're going. But if it's a third party unsure of, we make some calls. Same with Hurley, because it's a main road going up and down. It's covered by Area C, which is part of the agreement. We go there, and the Forest Service Road to the Keyhole Hot Springs, it's a main road out there. And then the High Line is a main road in the summertime. So these are kind of things that we've been going to. We've been getting cost recovery when we go. Most of our area is the Highway 99 to Duffy past Joffrey Lakes. So if we're not going past those boundaries, then if someone's in an accident, then no one's responding. So the cost, we're not looking at all Forest Service roads. We're just looking at the main ones that go to communities and are used by locals and residents of the areas.
Thanks, Chief Grossman. And I certainly want to make sure that we respond to any accidents within a zone that we can maintain. As you heard, my main concern is about wear and tear and our asset depreciation, because we're going a long ways beyond. And it's nice to get cost recovery, but I don't think that puts any extra money in our reserves to help pay for the extra wear and tear on the vehicle. So that was my main concern.
CEO Gilmore?
Yeah, I just wanted to add, I correct me if I'm wrong, Chief. The rates are relatively, I don't want to say competitive as their cost recovery, but they do charge back for the vehicle expenses and for the staff time that go out to those calls. And Chief, if you want to maybe give us a ballpark, how many times would you say we respond outside of our area?
Outside of our area,
significant distance. If we're going just north of Joffrey somewhat, I mean, we're already going there.
The majority of our calls are Joffrey to Blowdown Creek, which is all highway in that. And usually we just send a rescue truck, which is part of the agreement. Going down the Inchuk Forest Service Road, I think since I've been here in 2014, I think we've gone down 5 times. So it's maybe once a year. We've gone once up the Hurley Forest Service Road. And other than that, that's about it. And we've also, like any Forest Service roads that are not a main line to another community, we are not going down, for instance. So if you take a look at, what is it? I think it's just south of Pemberton, the Sioux River Forest Service Road, which goes out. So we don't go down that road because that's not a main route to anything, and it's usually bikes or whatever. So that's not what we're covering. So.
Thank you for that clarification.
Any other questions? Somebody like to move the resolution as presented by Ms. Fraser? Councillor Noble.
I'll move it as presented.
Second by Councillor Antonelli. For the discussion. Anyone opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much, Chief Grossman. Have a great afternoon. Go find something to do outside.
Thank you very much. I'll try. Thanks.
Okay, we're going to wait for some other staff to join us. Moving on to development services. Well,
Good morning, Council.
Good morning, everyone. So we're on to development services. We're looking at development variance permit number 127 for 7665 Cerulean Drive. For those, is this for after? So there will be an opportunity to speak for those in attendance who wish to provide comment on the proposed development variance permit. You'll be given an opportunity after our staff presentation and before council gets into full discussion. So with that, I will turn it over to Ms. Reese. Good morning, Ms. Reese. Mr. Chalmers, I will turn it over to you.
Great. I'll be providing an overview of the development variance permit application number 127 submitted by Stephanie Nicol Russell and David Russell, the owners of the subject property located at 7665 Cerulean Drive. The applicants are applying for variances to permit an existing retaining wall to facilitate the development of a single detached dwelling. The Village of Pemberton zoning bylaw sections 4.13 and 7.21 set a maximum retaining wall height of 1.2 meters in residential zones. Just to provide a little bit of background information, in July of 2018, a site alteration permit was issued authorizing exploratory site grubbing, construction of retaining walls up to 1.2 meters, and establishment of a driveway. In August of 2020, a building permit was issued for the construction of a detached residential dwelling. At this time, a retaining wall above 1.2 meters was not proposed through the permitting processes. After the overheight retaining wall was constructed, a stop work order was issued in September. Retaining walls above 1.2 meters require a separate building permit. Before obtaining a building permit for the retaining wall, the applicants must first receive a variance to the zoning bylaw. The applicants applied to the Board of Variance in October 2020, and the board determined that the variances requested fell outside of the scope of their jurisdiction, which led to the development variance permit application before you today. The subject lands are designated residential in the official community plan and are zoned residential amenity 1, Sunstone RSA 1. Adjacent lands are residential, and a pedestrian path and parkland is located adjacent to the rear lot line. On page 104 of the agenda package, here you can see the site plan, which shows the location and heights of the retaining wall. The height of the retaining wall ranges from 0.09 meters on the east interior lot line to 4.32 meters at its maximum height adjacent to the rear lot line, and goes down to 0.59 meters adjacent to the westerly interior lot line. The applicants are requesting the following variances to vary section 4.13A8 in order to allow a retaining wall in excess of 1.2 meters in height to be placed on a portion of the site in general compliance with the location and height on the site plan or in a location approved by building permit, not to exceed 43 meters in length, and to vary section 7.21AI to vary the maximum height of a retaining wall from 1.2 meters to a maximum of 4.32 meters, a variance of 3.12 meters. The applicants have advised that they are committed to landscaping the retaining wall and creating a landscape buffer to mitigate visual impacts. If you look on page 105 of the agenda package, here you can see a digital rendering of the proposed landscape screening, and a proposed landscape plan was also submitted, and it is shown on page 113 of the agenda package. An information sign regarding the application was posted on the subject lands, and notice of council's intent to consider issuance of the development variance permit was sent to adjacent property owners within 100 meters. The notice indicates that the public has the opportunity to speak towards the application at today's meeting or provide written comments. At the time of preparing the report, 4 written comments had been received, which are attached to the report as Appendix C. 2 additional letters were received on Monday, March 15th, and circulated to Council yesterday evening. Council has the following options. Firstly, to authorize the issuance of the development variance permit number 127 with the following condition: to provide a landscape bond in the amount of $6,000, which is equivalent to 120% of the soft landscaping costs. Secondly, to refuse the application. And lastly, to refer the application back to staff to address any further considerations. At this point, staff are seeking council's direction as to which option is preferred. Please let me know if you have any questions for staff before hearing comments from the public. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Reese. So yeah, before we open it up, are there any questions from council? Again, save your comments till later, but are there any questions for staff before I go to the public? Councilor Scott.
Thank you very much, Mayor Richmond. Through to Ms. Rees, just want to confirm that retaining walls that are built over 1.2 meters but have a terraced 0.6 meters are allowed to build up without any height restriction. Is that correct?
So those would be considered separate retaining walls if it is separated by 0.6 meters.
Okay, and then, excuse me, and that would be acceptable, but there would have to be a separate application. Is that correct?
Yes, so you are allowed to have retaining walls to a height of 1.2 meters at a horizontal distance of 0.6 meters, and they would each be considered an individual retaining wall.
Good. Thank you very much for clarifying that.
Thank you. Any other questions for staff? Ms. Reese, I mean, it's laid out in the landscaping plan. When you look at the digital rendering of the landscaping, it shows a line of trees. It shows greening of the retaining wall, which is shown elsewhere in the report, and then the trees in front of that to screen it. It would take some decent sized trees to be able to do that. With the lot layout, is there space? I just look at the pitch coming down from the retaining wall down to the road there. Is there actual space for that landscaping plan? Is staff comfortable with that? Or we can get sizable trees in front of that?
The best way that I can answer that question is if you look at page 113 of the agenda package, which shows the landscape plan which they have provided, which indicates where on the property the trees would be placed.
And within the variance, the way it's written now, the landscaping, you know, is there room, or is there consideration for putting more specifics onto it in terms of? I just want to make sure that if we're considering the screening option, that the screening will be ample, and I want to make sure that if that's considered, there will be wording to that effect. But I guess I could wait till later on that. See where we go first. Any other questions for staff? Go ahead, Councilor Young.
Oh, I just wanted to say that on page 127, it shows the profile of the landscaping and the trees and how that tree would screen the wall. Bottom of the page.
Right. Thank you. Any other questions for staff before I open it to the public? Okay, seeing none. So once again, for those in attendance who provide comment on the proposed EVP, please click on the raised hand feature in the webinar controls. Our staff, that'll let staff know that you would like to ask a question. They'll announce your name when it's your turn, and you'll be prompted to unmute your microphone. And let's keep comments related to the proposed development variance permit at hand. So with that, Ms. Kennedy, let me know who would like to speak.
Mayor Richmond, I don't see hands yet, but I do have a comment that Nikki Van Kirk put into the chat box, and she had to leave the meeting, and I can read that out while we're waiting for others.
Okay.
Nikki Van Kirk said that she can't stay for the variance, but I would like to register my concerns about the use of huge retaining walls to build houses more suited for flat lots rather than for the hillside lots. I think developers need to be held to a higher standard before the village approved for lot slope. I don't support this particular request as much too high, creates environment that neighbors will be in the shadow unless they also build out. And also visually, the neighborhood starts to look very unappealing. That height of straight wall seems unsafe from both the top and the bottom.
Thank you.
I now see a hand raised from Stephanie Nicol Russell.
Please go ahead. Good morning.
Good morning, Mayor and Council. Thanks very much for this opportunity to speak with you today. As you know, it's been a long 6 months of since we received our stop order. So finally, we do look forward to speaking in front of you this morning. We're confident that each of you have read our application, and at this time, I'm not going to go and spend time going through the 8 to 10 pages, but I will highlight a few things for you. So based on the background of our situation, the reason for the build of our retaining wall, the site section and site plans that we have submitted in our report, the challenge of the build of one of the 2 steepest lots on Cerulean Drive, so it's us at 7665 and 7667, the 2-to-1 grade, and then of course obtaining a bylaw or a driveway within the bylaw. Also acknowledging the difference of elevation from when we purchased our lot to where it sits currently. Our proposed landscaping plan and timeline, which is included as of June 30th this year. We do have our wall engineered by a geotech firm, and there are no imposing safety concerns to the public with our neighbors and the site or the pedestrian walkway, which is known right now as a service walkway in front of our retaining wall. We're simply just trying to find a solution to build on our steep lot. We have everything needed to be submitted for a development permit, and so therefore we're hoping a favorable support from Mayor and Council today. Further, I would like to address the following important factors. The front view of our retaining wall does not directly visually intrude into anyone's backyard. And because our lot exists in front of a green space, we chose the retaining wall so that we can easily landscape it. And we believe it's visually more appealing than a large cement foundation, which would be needed for because of the steepness of our lot to build our home, or trying to landscape structural fill, which of course can be challenging to do so. Our plan all along was to remove the overflow fill and do so upon the removal of the stop work order. So that has not, or the overflow has not been done because of the stop work order. Along with the fact that our home will partially be built on the retaining wall with a walkout basement. The fact that we have this retaining wall, we're going to be able to now enjoy a small backyard for recreational use with our family and have a small a vegetable garden. We are confident that we followed the Village of Pemberton's hillside guidelines, as you will see in our report that I've submitted. Staggering retaining walls were suggested at the March 2nd council meeting, however, are not mentioned in the hillside guidelines, and nor were suggested by the Village of Pemberton staff during the build of our retaining wall. The photo shown in the staff report presented to council on March 2nd shows a photo enlarged of our retaining wall from the side view and of the overflow of our fill. And as noted in our letter to you, the stop work order has impacted us from addressing this. Hopefully when it is lifted, we will allow the overflow will not be then visible from the adjacent lot. Ivy will be planted on the side portion of our retaining wall, for which our neighbors will see from their backyard rather than the view of a retaining wall. I've spoken to a horticulturist regarding the photo that you received in the March 2nd report from staff, and the 2 trees that you have seen in that report will not be impacted due to once we have removed the structural fill. It should be noted that we received our stop work order 2 weeks after the wall was built. And during that time of the 3-week build, there was 2 staff from the village of Pemberton that witnessed the growth of our retaining wall, and there was no feedback from them. One of them was the building inspector, and the second one was the manager of development services while she was building her home. The lot on the other side of us, so that would be 7667, was sold since the build of our retaining wall. And currently right now we have, as you can see, letters of support for our existing retaining wall. I want to note, since our letter that was submitted to you on January 30th, Ms. Edwards has sold her lot, which is 7663 Cerulean Drive. And last week I met with one of the new owners on site. He did confirm that our wall will not impact his view, and that his bottom floor will roughly be the same height as our retaining wall. And that moving forward from today, that he and his partner will meet us on site to address the overflow of the fill. I also want to, at this time, make mention of the existing retaining walls in Pemberton. In October 2020, from the Development Services Department, we received a list of permits issued and the residential addresses. And under the existing bylaw, 4 permits were issued and approved specifically for retaining walls. Neither of those had to go to a variance committee nor council for approval. One of the retaining walls is significantly larger and longer than ours, and it also encroaches onto adjacent lot, which as of October 20th or October 2020, the building permit has not been applied for. We had the opportunity to speak to 2 of those owners with those permits, who made mention of the following, quote, "Village of Pemberton staff were helpful during our application process," end of quote. And quote, "It was an easy process for us to obtain our permit for our variance for our retaining wall, and it took no time at all to receive the application," end of quote. Of the other building permits that have been issued by the Development Services Department since October 2020, or so as of October 2020, there are 6 retaining walls, all have been built over 1.2 meters. While some retaining walls currently have been built on flatter lots, have attempted to stagger the distance as recommended in the bylaw of 0.06 horizontal run, not all of them have met that target. Reference back, if I may, to the March 2nd council meeting, Mayor Richmond, you stated that you would like to see natural landscapes fit within the valley, and we believe that our landscaping will have that natural look. As well, it will partner with the existing landscaping that is completed in Sunstone. In previous council meetings, councillors have addressed that they would like to see developers more accountable, and we too would fully support this. I guess lastly, Mayor and Council, with the evidence provided in the confirmation of our landscaping plan, the immediate timeline, we're hoping that there are no further delays to receive this permit. We have addressed the concerns brought forward, which is mainly the visual impact and the structural overflow. As you can imagine, this delay has been impactful both emotionally and financially. And so far, this delay has cost us well over $12,000, never mind the $1,300 it's cost to present to you today. So Dave just wants to say one final thing, and then I just want to make a note that building season is upon us. We're eager to begin building our home without further delay. And again, we hope we have your support. And of course, we'll answer any questions. And I'll leave that with Dave then. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Russell, are you on?
Unmute yourself at the bottom, Dave. There you go.
Good morning, everyone. I just wanted to add, since I saw Nikki's comment, that houses should be designed to fit your lots, and I agree 100%. That's why we have a walkout basement. A walkout basement meant we didn't have to go up for a second story. We put our second story inside the basement, the extra bedrooms, and you can walk out the basement because it's on a slope and the front of your basement's wide open. That is our friends had that in Kelowna and we saw it and we really liked it and we thought it'd be a great fit for Sunstone. But unfortunately, we still have to have a retaining wall to get up to the height. And like Stephanie said, our neighbor agreed that his house is going to be above our retaining wall. So it's not an issue for him. And he bought the lot, I guess, a few weeks ago. I think that's all I have to say right now.
No, I want to talk about.
Oh, the bylaws. There's two bylaws on the books right now. One is a building bylaw and one is a zoning bylaw. The building bylaw states you can build walls over 1.2 meters as long as you have the engineering. And that's what we did. Chris Derwin and I had agreed for me to submit my engineering when I had my final inspection from the engineer, which was going to happen on the Tuesday. The Monday before Tuesday, we got the stop work order. And then their second bylaw states that no wall should be built over 1.2 meters. So to me, that they kind of contradict each other. And I think everybody is very confused about these two. But as far as I know, that's what we did. Our engineering is already submitted to the village and we were trying to get a permit when we got shut down. The two bylaw numbers are part 7.21 from the zoning bylaw and the other bylaw is part 22 retraining structures. And that's about all I have to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Would anybody else like to speak to the development variance permit?
We have one more hand raised.
Go ahead.
This is Mark McIver.
Go ahead, Mr. McIver.
Good morning, Mayor and Council. Thank you for the opportunity to ask a few questions. Question one would be if Council did have an opportunity to review our letter that was submitted yesterday.
Yes.
So with that letter, I'm not going to go too far into any details here. I think it's pretty straightforward. The impacts and concerns that we have are not visual, and we are not opposing the use of retaining walls. We clearly understand the use of them, and we also clearly understand the bylaws and how we would use them on our lot if we deem that we need to use retaining walls. So it's not necessarily the visual impact. I will say that I didn't necessarily agree or disagree to the visual impacts, but I trust that Council will understand our letter and our concerns with the way the wall is built, and with any of the fill being removed, the further impacts it will have. One note that was not on the letter was once that structural fill is removed and the toe of the retaining wall on the eastern property line is lowered, it will further encroach the property line. If you look at the information provided, it's, I believe, 38 centimeters currently at the top to the property line. And that depth of that structural fill on that property line is approximately 1.5 to 2 meters. So if you can imagine imaginary line getting extended down, it will eminently encroach. So that is just an additional comment, I suppose, to all the comments that we presented in our letter. So I trust if there's no questions based on that letter that, yep, we'll leave it with you.
Thank you, Mr. McIver. Would anybody else from the public like to speak?
We have no other raised hands.
Okay, we'll give it a quick moment. Okay, maybe I can probe a couple questions that came out of the speaker's comments for staff. One, could staff maybe speak to the stated discrepancy between the two zoning, the zoning and the building bylaw in terms of retaining walls? Can you provide some clarity on that?
Mr. Mayor, I'll handle that one. The building bylaw typically sets more of a process or a procedure or the information requirements to obtain a building permit. And as I understand it, that bylaw says any retaining wall over 1.2 meters will require a building permit. The zoning bylaw, it regulates the land use and the structures and the forms. So they play different roles. They're different bylaws for different reasons. And the zoning bylaw establishes a maximum height of 1.2 meters. As council is aware, we've had a number of discussions around the zoning bylaw and the potential to modify it in different ways. And part of that is not necessarily to acknowledge that discrepancy, but realize that retaining walls over 1.2 meters are going to be required from time to time, we believe, on some of these hillside sites. So I would suggest that the bylaws aren't in conflict, because the way this would work is that if council were to grant a variance for a retaining wall higher than 1.2 meters, the building bylaw would kick in and say, okay, well, that requires engineering and a separate permit. That's how they work together.
Thank you. Could you also, staff also maybe speak to the comments around the removal of the fill at the toe of the wall and causing further encroachment and some of those concerns in that letter from Mr. McIver?
Mr. Mayor, through you, I mean, certainly the plans that we're looking at are not contemplating that level of encroachment. I think that's something that, should council proceed with the development variance permit, staff would take, the building section would take it incumbent upon themselves to make sure that the property is developed within its property boundaries. I was just reading through the drawings in response to that letter, and I can see the concern, and it's a legitimate concern, but I am certain that that would be, could be part of the further review process should this proceed. Certainly what's before council today is a fairly simple request, whether council is willing to grant the additional height of the retaining wall or not. The other duties of the building official for approvals and other district staff to make sure that this site gets built properly will still remain, where there's no variances sought for anything other than the height of the retaining wall.
Okay, maybe one more question coming out of the comments. It was mentioned that this is one of the steepest properties in the development, and that apparently elevation changes were made by the developer after the fact or in stream. How does staff feel about the steepness of this property in terms of other options? I know we've looked, we talked about terracing and that sort of thing. Obviously that works better on some properties than others. I just like maybe some context or clarity around the statement that the property is so steep that it wouldn't allow for safe or reasonable access through the driveway, for emergency vehicles, that sort of thing. Can you comment on that?
Mr. Mayor, the average natural grade of this site is 37.7 degrees slope. That is an exceptionally sloped lot. Amongst some of the steeper ones that I've worked with, and I've spent most of my career in mountain towns and hillsides. It is a very steep lot, and this is, at the risk of rehashing some of the conversations before, this is the sort of thing that the next subdivision phases on the hillside in Sunstone or anywhere else is going to capture. And we're seeing some of that work come to fruition in pre-application meetings. But this lot left on its own at a 37.7% slope will be very challenged to do anything meaningful without some substantial retention. And I will suggest that the building form, if you were to look at the cross sections provided in your package, they do show a house or a building form that's kind of custom built for hillside development. That's one of the more desirable forms from an owner's perspective with the walkout basement, but it's also how you would typically construct a building to adapt to a hillside. And at that, this is not trying to put a flatland home on a hill lot at all. But despite that effort to do a meaningful building, the grades do create such a significant challenge at 37.7%. There's a lot of jurisdictions where that degree of slope is typically reserved for other forms of development, multifamily forms and other things that can handle a slope more appropriately. And because this particular phase of the project was left each individual lot to achieve its own grading, it certainly hasn't made matters easier for the owners or for several of the other purchasers in that neighborhood, we suspect.
Thank you. And one last question on that. You know, as you said, we've put into place or put in steps so that future development, future subdivision, hopefully does not create such challenging lots. With what has been created so far, do you see a number of lots that are this steep up there that we're going to be looking at this sort of issue?
Mr. Mayor, through you, I can't answer that question specifically. We know there's a number of lots that have been approved, which are in the same condition. There was some discussion around doing more detailed analysis to see what the average grades and average slopes of all of those lots would be. It's a fair amount of work. I would say this would be on the steeper end, just from my own casual observations. And we don't have a lot of the information to be able to prove otherwise, but I don't imagine that I don't imagine that this lot will be typical of every lot that's remaining. For certain, it will be amongst the steepest up there.
Okay, thank you. So I'll ask again, are there any questions before we start getting into comments and discussion? Any more questions coming out?
Yes, we have a question from Barb Turin.
Go ahead, Ms. Turin.
Hi, Mayor and Council. Thanks for letting me speak. I just wanted to say that our lot is actually, that we have just built on up at the ridge, is actually substantially steeper than the lot that Dave and Stephanie are building on. As well, there's a lot next to us that's currently for sale from the original owner, and it is also considerably steeper than 37 degrees. It's basically a cliff face. I actually don't understand how that was ever agreed to be sold as a lot. Just from an owner's perspective, you know, we bought and invested in this community and went on to build here, but the difficulty that we had building when our lot grade was finished was substantial. So I just wanted to point out to the council that this is not something that just Dave and Stephanie have faced building on this hillside. It's been considerable for many people and many of the other lots that are up here. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions for staff? Council, any questions for staff? All right, seeing no more hands and no more questions, I will open up for discussion and comments. Who would like to go? That's got it. You're on mute, Council.
You're on mute.
That way nobody will get to hear what I'm going to say. It's unfortunate this is coming forward to us, is putting council in a very unfortunate situation. I took a look at three things when I took a look at maybe reaching a decision. First of all, I looked at the bylaw regarding retaining walls, and the retaining wall could have been built to that height if they would have terraced the land like the bylaw allows. That would have lost a little land on the top of the property, may not allow the house they chose to build, but the opportunity to do that was there if the bylaw had been followed. The second thing I took a look at was any hardships that would create for the neighbors, the visual effect on the neighborhood. And I reread the hillside development policy, and in some instances, it does not meet those policy requirements. And the third thing I took a look at was the fact that an application was made to the variance board. The variance board has two options. They can say yes or no. In this instance, they sent it back to council to deal with because it was outside their jurisdiction, them saying that it became a major variance rather than a hardship situation. And that's why it's before council now. So when I took a look at the 3 areas that we have to make a decision, that's bylaw, hillside development policies, and the variance board, that's what I'm going to base my decision on. Thanks, Mayor Richmond.
I should have been clear. Thank you, Councillor Gaddick. I should have been clear for the attendees. Now that I've closed the input part of it, where the opportunity to comment and respond is over now. Now we're into discussion and debate for council. Who would like to go next? Councillor Antonelli.
Yeah, I think this is a really difficult decision, and I do have a lot of sympathy for the landowner, because I know it's a difficult process and I know it costs a lot of money. I think the screening plan that they submitted, I think it's a good one and it has some potential, and I think it could be supported if it was supported in the neighborhood, but it's not. There are some significant issues created for the neighbor, and I think those have to be addressed. I don't think we can approve a variance that causes hardship for the neighbor. Yeah, I think, the fill is going to be removed on the neighboring property, and I think that's good. But it doesn't really address the impacts of the wall itself visually, and the views, and just the imposing nature of the wall. And so I think this retaining wall does need to be modified to, I guess, fit with the neighbors' plans for the property. I think this is, it's really unfortunate that this is happening. I think this is where the developer could have played a role in coordinating, where, shared terracing between the lots could have solved this. So I guess my comments are that I don't think the whole wall needs to be removed. Looking at the bottom of page 127, it's pretty clear that a good chunk of that wall is for building out a bit of a yard. But I do think it needs to be modified in some way that addresses the concerns raised by the neighbor. I think this could be a good role for the developer to step in and coordinate. And so I guess the option that I'm looking at in the staff report is option 3, refer back to staff. I'd like to see the wall modified in some way and those neighbor impacts addressed. And of course, I'm very conscious of the cost to the applicant, the landowner. But I still don't feel like we can ignore the impacts on the neighbor.
Thank you, Councillor Antonelli. Councillor Noble, would you like to begin? Go ahead.
I think the applicant has put a lot of time into trying to build a very difficult lot and a lot of resources, and their landscape plan looks really good to me for the screening. And I'm happy to hear that they will be cleaning up the overflow, because it's definitely not right to have overflow onto a neighboring property. And I would support option 1 at this time, so that we can move forward with minimal additional costs. There's already been an excessive amount of cost to a lot owner, which honestly should have fallen on the developer, but we're beyond that.
Okay, thank you. So my thoughts are a combination of all that. We've all struggled with this, certainly. We're trying to ensure that the development on the hillside, as we've said before, fits the landscape, fits the character of the valley, all that good stuff. We're trying to look ahead, and we've talked about that, and we've put steps in place to make sure that we can be even more advanced in the planning of that to make sure that happens. In the meantime, it sounds like we still have a number of properties in stream that are very steep, and I'm my concern, and there's a lot of things that led to this. It sounds like there's a number of missteps will come. It's unfortunate we find ourselves in a position now where we're looking at it as a variance after it's been built. It makes it harder to look at options like potentially like Councillor Antonelli's, which is, reduce, use the same well. I don't know how that works with engineering. I don't know if you could just reduce it and carry on with your plan. So it's unfortunate that it got built to this extent, and we're sitting here in this awkward position. And I know what we're trying to avoid, but I am concerned that we could potentially be punishing these landowners unduly because, looking at the fact that their land is that steep. I know what we're trying to accomplish, but I don't know if the fact that this lot has been divided in such a way that is the topography. Apparently there were elevation changes made as the development proceeded. I just worry that we're trying to do the right thing, but this is too much for this particular situation. And this is why the variance process is there. It's for those extenuating circumstances and exceptions where you can't make the cookie cutter work. So I'm very concerned about that. If we move ahead, I am open to supporting option 1 at this point with a very robust landscaping plan. I like what was provided. I would just like to make sure that if we go ahead with option 1, that landscaping is, that there's sizes and anything we can to make sure, and maintenance of, to make sure that landscaping happens in its full form. But with that in place, I would be willing to consider option number 1. I worry about the precedent. I know, we're trying to avoid that, but this is sort of where we put ourselves when we decided to keep it at 1.2 meters. So we're going to see properties like this come forward, and we're going to have to decide on a case-by-case basis whether it is a big impact visually, whether there are other options, and hopefully we can address this before people get into the construction level. So I struggle with that too. I struggle with the fact that we've gotten all the way to this point and have to make a decision based on the fact that so much has been spent, and we're trying to help these owners out, whereas this conversation should have happened prior to any of those rocks being put in place. So those would be my comments. Anybody else like to provide any thoughts at this point? If not, it'll be time to look for a motion. Any thoughts? Okay. Go ahead, Councillor Noble.
I'd like to move option 1 with the landscaping bond.
I'd like to second for discussion. I will second for discussion. Further discussion. I see Councillor Antonelli, then Councillor Craddock. Go ahead,
I just had a comment on the landscaping. So the trees form a perimeter, conifer trees, I believe they were, form a perimeter around the wall. And I expect when the wall of trees grows up and blocks the view that they will then be cut down. It's just a comment.
I'm sorry, that when the trees grow up and block the wall, what's going to happen?
I expect that when the trees grow up and begin to block the view, they will be cut down.
Oh. Thank you. Councillor Craddock?
Yeah, the concern I still have is that we have to respect the neighbors. The bylaw was not followed when there was an opportunity to build a terraced wall. They would have lost maybe the garden at the top, but they would have met the requirements of the bylaw. So I still have some concerns. I would be more in favor of working with Councillor Antonelli to look at option 3 and see if there's not some way that we can reduce that wall down and terrace it so that it actually meets the neighbor's needs, meets the bylaw, and also fits in with the hillside development policy. I understand the situation they're in. I feel very sorry for them, but it's not an issue that council has created. We do have policies and bylaws in place that need to be followed. And if we don't do that, I guess my concern is, what do we do with the next 10 or 15 or 30 people between that project and the Benchland project that are going to be in front of us, also looking for variances for different issues? So I do have some concerns, so I will not be able to support number 1.
Thank you. And so my thoughts on the motion are, again, I feel that, you know, this is an example of where variances are important due to the steepness of this lot. You know, I would be willing to accept this variance on this case, in this case. I agree with Councillor Craddock. This is, you know, there are bylaws that could have been followed more closely, and we didn't put ourselves in the situation. We did, unfortunately, not unfortunately, at the same time, we've recently decided that we were going to keep a 1.2 meter height maximum for our wall. So we have put ourselves in a situation where we are going to look at a number of these variances. And I think we have to look at them with visual impact, with landscaping, with impact to neighbors on the mind, just as we've done here today. But I'm just clarifying that moving forward for the in-stream applications, we will certainly be looking at other variances, and these are the items that we're going to have to consider. Yeah, I guess that's it for my comments. Go ahead, Councillor Craddock.
Yeah, thanks very much, Mayor Richmond. I just want to be really clear here. Like, we're saying that we're going to be faced with other issues with retaining walls above 1.2 meters. Yes, we may be, but if people follow the bylaw, it allows for a higher height as long as you terrace the wall. I asked that question specifically at the last council meeting before we agreed on council to support the previous bylaw. I asked that question today, and again, I was told, yes, you can go higher than that 1.2 meters as long as you do a terraced area that's 0.6 meters. So on the top of a hill, we're looking at a potential 2-to-1 slope, just like we're looking at with a lot up there that's earth filled at a 2-to-1 slope. So there are options. They can be done correctly. And again, it's not an easy situation to put us in, but the variance board did turn it down because they felt it was outside their jurisdiction. I don't think it meets a variance as far as a hardship because it hasn't been done correctly.
Thank you. Any further comments? So can I just get clarity from staff? If this motion, if I call the question on this motion and if it fails, we can still go with option 3, which allows for a variance application, but a different one. In other words, they can reduce the size of the wall potentially or go back. I just want to make sure that we're not handcuffing.
Mr. Mayor, through you, under your development procedures bylaw, I believe if a resolution of approval fails, the application is refused. So we ran into this situation before. If the appetite of council is tending towards a deferral, I would suggest that the motion be modified or withdrawn and a deferral motion be put in its place.
Okay, thank you. Councilor, everybody get that? Go ahead, Councilor Antonelli.
I'm not entirely sure if that motion is going to be supported, so I really don't want to leave the landowner hanging. Maybe we could have a friendly amendment to change it to option 3. How does that work?
I would say at this point, I would ask the mover, I would ask Councilor Nova if she would like to take it off the table, since I haven't called the question yet, and then I'll open it up for another motion. Just recognizing that if then that's why I asked the question to staff. If I call the question on it, basically what it means, if the motion fails, the application fails. If the idea is to defer it, send it back to staff, see if there are some options that are cost effective for them to reduce the size of the wall, or I'm not too sure what. If that is the direction we're looking at, then we should remove the first motion is what I'm getting at. Councilor Noble, go ahead.
I'll take it off the table. I don't want them to get refused, and it doesn't look like they have enough support here.
Okay, so the motion is no longer on the table. Councilor Caddick, a comment before I look for another motion?
Yeah, Mayor Richmond, I was going to suggest if we don't want to hold the folks up too much longer with the decision, but it appears that item number 3 is going to be the way we may end up going, so that they don't have to put another application in, so they don't have to pay any more fees. Along with that motion, can we say that we're going to defer the decision today back to staff, so there isn't any more cost, and that we have staff bring back and work with the developers of the lot a reasonable solution to the next council meeting?
I thought that's sort of what option 3 laid out. How is that different? Sure, I just got to bring it back up.
Okay, and I just want to make sure there's no extra cost and that they don't have to go through a whole new application. I don't want to see that happen.
No, but I think realistically, if we're asking them to look at options to lower that wall, then there's going to be some design costs involved, I would assume, but.
I'm not looking at the cost for the person involved. I'm looking at the cost in staff time to make sure that we work with them to find a resolution to this wall that doesn't meet number 1.
Okay. So previous motion's been removed. I will open the floor for another motion. Councillor Antonelli.
I'd like to make motion number 3, refer it back to staff to work with the applicant and the developer to look at options for modifying the wall to address the impacts to the neighbor.
Second, Councillor Caddick. Any discussion? Call the question. Anyone opposed? Motion carries. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chalmers. Okay. Next up are gun bylaws. We're on to the mayor's report. I actually have a fairly short mayor's report for once. Not a ton to relay. Our previous meeting was postponed because due to unforeseen circumstances, we couldn't make quorum on Thursday. So we're going to be having that meeting day after tomorrow. And hopefully that will finalize the budget to be sent to be ratified to the regional district, which is at the end of this month, next Wednesday. What else can I tell you? My weekly calls with Vancouver Coastal Health have been, as you can imagine, mostly about the vaccination rollout, how they're coordinating with our community and other communities to make that happen. Lots of questions from other mayors to see what it's going to look like. One thing that I brought up on the last call, just for your interest, is, there's discussion about, obviously the vaccine's being rolled out according to age, starting 85 and plus and moving younger from there. And it's meant to sort of work all, at the same time across the province. One of the things I brought up, for instance, was the fact that when registration opened here in Pemberton for our seniors, there was at that point on Friday, so I'm sure it's upped, but there was about 60 out of 100 registered or potentially registered as seniors who called in to get their vaccination. So in other words, if everybody called in, there'd be approximately 185 and plus that would be coming to the clinic this week. The clinic is open this week. So my question to VCH was, look at, can you not do more numbers than that? Oh, I missed something. Okay, I'll catch that after. Can we not look at doing greater numbers at a time when they come into a place like Pemberton? In fact, what about the concept of coming into a valley like ours and being able to vaccinate all of the adult population? We have the space, you know, we could look at finding people to help distribute and vaccinate and all that sort of thing. So anyway, that was something that was pushed for. And there was a little bit of an uptick. I mean, basically the response from VCH was, look, and now that the supply has increased of vaccination, they will look for any ways they can to be more efficient. And maybe that could benefit a small town like ours. So I'll keep probing away on that one. But most of the conversation has been around vaccination, the glitches that were had in the registration system last week. But hopefully we're up and running. As I said, our vaccinations start tomorrow, Wednesday, March 17th, and that's for seniors 80 and over. And if you still haven't booked your appointment, you could visit the village website, VCH website for COVID, and there's a 1-877 number that we could provide as well. Really not a lot else in meetings to update you on. A couple quick notes, just to remind the public that the public health officer has amended the gathering of events. We're allowed up to 10 people now outdoors. Indoor restrictions remain the same, but the good news is it's absolutely gorgeous. So if you're gonna gather with 9 of your closest people, why wouldn't you do it outdoors anyway? And we have that opportunity here. And just a reminder that at 3 o'clock this afternoon, we do our parcel roll review panel. And there's Zoom details for that if any of the public would like to attend. That's all I have today. Any council reports? Councilor Craddock.
Thanks very much, Mayor Richmond. We had a collaborative meeting last week, and it was my pleasure to introduce Laura Murphy, our new project and research coordinator, who has now taken that position that Jill used to have, and it was nice to have her at the meeting and get back to a situation where the administrator won't have to fill in the meantime for that, which we appreciate she was doing in the past. Basically, what the meeting was about was to receive the final report that Veronica presented to council and has presented to the SLRD. And what we decided at that meeting was, rather than vote on acceptance, because we had a lack of attendance from some people down the valley and stuff, that instead of voting on it, because that would indicate that we were all in favor and we want to reach a consensus, we moved to just receive the report. And we have asked Meredith and Lisa with the Chamber of Commerce to put together a press release with agreement from all of the collaborative that we can go forward with, let the public know that the 100,000 or the money that we received from the government to do this funding of $100,000 has been accomplished, and that there has been some really good work come out of that meeting. Both myself and Maxine were able to talk about a future business opportunity that we have entered into. And that was part of the collaborative's finding through the report, was finding ways that we could work closer through reconciliation and business opportunities. And we've succeeded in doing that. And I think the collaborative realized there is a great potential going forward if we work together. Out of that, there was 3 items that came up. One of the items originally intended to look at was, do we need a regional economic development office or officer? It was discussed that we feel that position is not in itself necessarily needed. But if there was a broader scope, including more items, then it may become something that we could look at in the future, and funding would become an issue as far as seeing if all the collaborative members would take a look at that, because we do call it a regional report. The second thing we looked at is strengthening the regional relationships. That was the second item where we'll continue with the collaborative, and we'll see if there's ways that we can work together on different business opportunities, advancement of transit, road construction, that type of thing. So we are looking forward to moving forward. And the third item was moving forward on implementing the actions out of the report. And with that in mind, we have turned it back to the executive committee. Meredith leads that in the chamber, and for them to take a look at how we're going to move forward, who's going to accept some of the responsibilities for some of the issues, and what the timeline would be. And so along with that, I've had the pleasure of serving as chair for the last 2 years while we've done this report, or almost 2 years since we've done this report. The original intent was each community would take a 1-year chairship. And so now we hopefully will see somebody else step forward, take that position on. And I think it was a wonderful opportunity to sit with all the community groups throughout the corridor. And I think it's opened up the door to opportunities that lie ahead. And I certainly look forward to a very positive outcome from this collaboration. And that's it, Mayor Richmond.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor. Any other councillor? Okay, seeing none, thank you. I'm going to have to take us back because I did miss 10A. It's Village of Pemberton Board of Variance bylaw number 893. We've looked at this a number of times. It's up for adoption. Are there any questions or comments about that? Councillor Craddock?
I'll move the motion, Mayor Richmond.
Move adoption by Councillor Craddock, seconded by Councillor Antonelli. Discussion. Anyone opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Sorry about missing that. All right. Correspondence for action. Nothing. Correspondence for information. There's a whole number of them. Would anybody like to point anything out? See none. Can I get a motion to receive? Councillor Craddock, seconded by Councillor Noble. All in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Decision on late business. Late business. Notice of motion. Question period. Would anyone from the attendees like to ask a question?
Mayor Richmond, we have no hands raised.
All right. Okay, then I'm going to recess the regular meeting. Let's take, I don't know, 15 minutes.
Okay, you can start. We've got to reconvene.
Okay, I'm going to reopen the regular council meeting, and then I'm going to look for a motion to go in camera. Moved by Councillor Antonelli, second by Councillor Noble. On favor, opposed, motion carries. We're in camera.
Okay, just stand by for a sec.